Imagine you're polishing someone's shoes. Suddenly, the person starts talking about the coming of the Antichrist, about defeating death, about a factory where hope is built, about how one day you too will have to enter it to escape the Antichrist. And then you realize you're talking to Peter Thiel or Willy Wonka. This video is your golden ticket, your ticket into Willy Wonka's factory, a journey beyond capitalism, into a world where technology can predict your every move, where it knows you better than you know yourself, where the freedoms we take for granted slowly begin to fade, while the power of the elite continues to grow. We are talking about the emergence of a word that Peter Thiel, a co-founder of both PayPal and Palantir, and one of Silicon Valley's most influential thinkers, has become one of the foremost heralds of. And the symbols of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory may help us understand that word. But first, let's answer a simple question. What is the American dream? Although we usually associate it with the United States, it represents something much broader. The belief that through hard work, determination, and risk-taking, anyone can succeed, no matter where they come from, even from the deepest poverty. Charlie grows up in a family living in extreme poverty. Their only steady income comes from his father's low-paying job. Day after day, he performs the same monotonous, meaningless work just to keep the family afloat. Charlie's future seems completely hopeless. Yet he never becomes cynical, never loses hope, because he believes there is a way out. And that hope has a name: Willy Wonka. Not just a successful businessman, but an inventor, a genius, an almost superhuman figure. The kind of extraordinary individual society turns into a legend. He embodies the promise of the American dream, that no matter how humble your beginnings, you might one day reach the very top.
Wealth, this is according to Oxfam, of the world's 85 richest people is equal to the 3.5 billion poorest people.
It's fantastic. And this is a great thing because it inspires everybody, gets the motivation to look up to the 1% and say, I want to become one of those people. I'm going to fight hard to get up to the top. This is fantastic news, and of course I applaud it.
This idea has long been one of the founding myths of American society. Extreme wealth inequality remains acceptable as long as everyone can believe that one day they too might reach the top. The promise is not that everyone will succeed. It is that anyone can. All you have to do is find the path to success. That is exactly what the golden ticket represents. Willy Wonka hides 5 golden tickets inside millions of chocolate bars. The odds of finding one are almost zero, but not quite. And that is exactly what keeps the dream alive. We all know these stories. A company that starts in a garage becomes a global corporation. A college student builds the world's largest social media platform. An unknown entrepreneur becomes a billionaire. Out of millions, only a handful succeed. But those rare exceptions keep the belief alive that the next one could be anyone. That belief is what drives people. Just as it does in the film, where everyone becomes obsessed with buying chocolate. They make greater and greater sacrifices for an increasingly unlikely chance. Charlie's father is replaced by a machine, yet the system sends a different message. Don't see it as an injustice, because one day you could be the owner of the factory. That is why Charlie's grandfather spends the family's last savings on one more chocolate bar. This is the logic of a success-driven society. Better to risk everything in a single chance than accept a lifetime of stagnation. In the film, the price of the American dream is not just hard work, it is the willingness to sacrifice everything for a single opportunity, even though in the end, success is still decided by luck. But does everyone really have the same chance of finding the path to success? According to the system, they do. Reality tells a different story. The other 4 golden ticket winners represent 4 archetypes of people who are far more likely to reach the top than those from whom luck is the most important factor. Veruca represents inherited privilege. She is not lifted up by achievement, but by inherited wealth. For her, the path to success has already been paved. Violet represents ruthless competition. For her, everything is about winning. She will crush anyone to succeed, friend or rival. Mike represents exceptional intelligence, the kind of person from whom today's technological elite often emerges. His abilities allow him to do things that remain out of reach for almost everyone else. Augustus represents obsession. He does the same thing over and over again, with extraordinary intensity, until he finally achieves his goal. He dedicates his entire life to a single pursuit, in his case, eating. And then there is Charlie. Someone trying to climb the social ladder can work as hard as they want. In the end, success is still decided by luck. So all 5 of them found a golden ticket. They stepped onto the path that leads to success. In the old world, that was enough. From there, success could be built. But now a different question emerges. What kind of world will they have to succeed in? What rules govern the world that Wonka's factory represents? And more importantly, what kind of world is approaching? To answer that, we should begin with one of Karl Marx's most famous observations. The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. By that logic, the future will be shaped by the ideology of a new ruling class. So before anything else, we need to understand who this new elite is and how it thinks. Let's begin with Willy Wonka. He did not build his success through competition. He created chocolates that no one had ever made before. That is almost exactly the argument Peter Thiel makes in 0 to 1. Real innovation does not come from competition. It comes from creating something entirely new. According to Thiel, competition is destructive. It drives down profits. It forces companies into endless battles. The real goal is monopoly, a position where no genuine competitor exists. That is exactly what Wonka achieved. His inventions gave him an effective monopoly. Then his rivals stole his recipes, copied his products, and just like that, he lost his advantage. Competition returned, so Wonka shut down the factory and disappeared. In reality, he did not abandon chocolate. He abandoned a world in which success depends on a constant competition. And that is where the story becomes truly interesting. Could there be a system in which competition is no longer necessary? Could we move beyond the logic of the free market while wealth and power remain concentrated in the hands of the same elite? The truth is, such a world is already beginning to take shape. The transformation of capitalism has already begun. According to Yanis Varoufakis, the turning point came with the financial crisis of 2008. Governments bailed out the banks. Central banks created enormous amounts of new money. But that money did not flow into new factories or productive investment. Instead, corporations bought stocks, real estate, and other financial assets. The rich became even richer. Meanwhile, the economy grew increasingly stagnant. Varoufakis calls this golden stagnation. This flood of money made it possible for tech giants to build today's digital infrastructure. Investors were no longer focused primarily on profits. They cared more about one thing, that companies kept becoming more valuable. Companies like Amazon built data centers, artificial intelligence, digital platforms. They were no longer trying simply to generate profits. They were building systems that everyone else would eventually depend on. According to Varoufakis, capitalism has not disappeared. Markets still exist, profits still exist, but beneath the surface a new economic system is beginning to emerge. Just as capitalism once replaced feudalism, something else may now be replacing capitalism. But what actually changed? The economy is driven less and less by profit and more by rent. You earn a profit by creating new value. You earn rent when others pay you simply because you own the system they are forced to operate through. According to Varoufakis, cloud capital has taken this logic to an entirely new level. But what exactly is cloud capital? Throughout history, those who controlled the most important resource of their age held power. Under feudalism, it was land. Under capitalism, it was capital. Today, a new resource has become the foundation of power: cloud capital. It consists of digital platforms, algorithms, data centers, artificial intelligence. These systems do more than serve us. They constantly collect data about us. They learn our habits, and they become increasingly capable of shaping our decisions. Apple does not simply sell smartphones, it owns a closed digital ecosystem. App developers can reach users only through that ecosystem, and in return, they surrender a share of their revenue. Varoufakis calls this cloud rent. The same logic applies to Amazon. Sellers can reach customers only through the platform, so they pay for every sale. The platform is no longer just a marketplace. It is the market itself. The digital fiefdom. It does more than provide access. It writes the rules. It decides who appears, in what order, and how much they have to pay. Sometimes a single algorithm change is enough. A business can lose access to its market. According to Varoufakis, this is why traditional businesses are becoming vassals of the platform. That is the essence of techno-feudalism. Companies no longer compete in a free market. They compete on someone else's land, paying continuous rent to its owner. But who owns these digital fiefdoms? Varoufakis calls them the cloudalists. Let's take a look at Wonka's story. His father is a dentist. He forbids everything related to sweets. Chocolate becomes the forbidden fruit, and from that prohibition, Wonka's creativity is born. Eventually, he leaves his family, because he believes it is their rules that would have prevented him from fulfilling his potential. The very same idea appears in Peter Thiel's thinking, only in his case, the family is replaced by the state. Like many entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, Thiel is a libertarian. He believes the state is the greatest obstacle to exceptional people. It regulates, it redistributes, it strives for equality. And in doing so, it restrains the very people capable of genuine innovation. That is why, in his view, the goal is not to reform politics, but to move beyond it. And for Thiel, this was never just a philosophical idea. According to Thiel, the decline of Western civilization is driven by egalitarianism and the liberal political order. Progress is not driven by the masses, it is driven by exceptional individuals, and that is why they should lead society. In this worldview, the technology entrepreneur is not simply a businessman, he is a hero. The Silicon Valley philosophy known as founder mode reflects exactly this idea. The founder is not a manager, he is the one person capable of making the decisions that matter the most. His worldview, however, is deeply apocalyptic. In the Bible, the Antichrist is the great deceiver of the end times, the one who leads humanity astray through fear and the promise of false peace. Thiel reinterprets this figure in political terms. He argues that the Antichrist will exploit humanity's fear of catastrophe to bring the world under a single global government, nuclear war, climate change, pandemics, artificial intelligence. All are threats that invite the same response. If the danger is global, then the solution must be global as well. This idea is captured by the phrase of one word or none. Either we accept a single word government or we perish. But according to Thiel, this is a false choice. Fear is being used to make centralized power appear as the only rational solution. Instead, he draws a distinction between the city of man and the city of God. The first is centralized, unstable, built on coercion. The second is decentralized. Its political equivalent, he argues, is the Patchwork, a network of competing libertarian city-states. Yes, you heard that right. According to Thiel, the Patchwork is the political equivalent of the city of God. But what exactly is it? The Patchwork, developed by Curtis Yarvin, bears a striking resemblance to digital fiefdoms. The only difference is that digital fiefdoms exist online. Patchwork extends the same logic into the real world. Here, it is no longer a platform or an app store that becomes private property, but the city, the state, society itself. In that sense, the digital fiefdom is a prototype of the Patchwork. If we want to see what such a system looks like in practice, all we have to do is step inside Willy Wonka's factory. Our characters are still the same, the ones who found the path to success. The difference is that now they must succeed under the rules of a new world, a world shaped by the ideology of a new ruling class. Wonka's factory is a sovereign state run by a corporation. Here, only the company's rules apply. Wonka is the only true sovereign. He makes the rules, he makes the final decisions, and there is no higher authority that can overrule him. The factory may belong to its shareholders, but real power is concentrated in the hands of a single ruler, without any separation of powers. The only limit on his authority is whether people choose to stay. They cannot vote him out. They can only leave for another state like it. The first room is the chocolate room. It shows us what a patchwork city might look like. In such a system, the corporation profits from the value of its own territory. That gives it a direct incentive to make the city clean, safe, attractive. The better the place is to live, the more capital, talent, and new residents it attracts, and the more valuable the territory becomes. The goal is to create a world that appears perfect. But this paradise is not public property. Everything belongs to the corporation, and where everything is privately owned, the owner decides what you are allowed to touch. And what happens if you break the rules? There is no higher authority to restrain him. The final decision is always his. Augustus fails to understand this. He reaches for something that does not belong to him. He violates the owner's rules. And in a system like this, violating private property always has consequences. The inventing room represents the experimental nature of the patchwork. It proposes an entirely new operating system for politics. But a system like this cannot be introduced all at once. It has to be tested first. On smaller sovereign territories, only then can we find out whether it actually works. But every experiment has its test subjects. The consequences of new political, economic, and technological ideas are borne by the people who live there. Meanwhile, there is no higher authority capable of stopping the experiment or overruling the sovereign decisions. Experimentation always has its casualties. Violet never questions the risks, and in the end, she becomes one of them. In the patchwork, every person is expected to create economic value. But what happens to those who cannot support themselves? Or to those whom no sovereign state is willing to accept? According to the theory, they are removed from the system. Not physically, but by being virtualized. Separated from the real world while continuing to exist in an artificial one. That is exactly what happens to Veruca. The squirrels decide that she is a bad nut. In other words, she has no value to the system. And what has no value is removed. The television room represents the dominance of technology. In the patchwork, technology is not merely a convenience. It is the foundation of society itself. It tracks people's movements, their identities, their permissions. It maintains order, reduces crime, and above all, it serves the interests of the corporation. But Mike believes he can use this technology for his own purposes, that he can wield its power. In the end, he discovers the opposite. He is not using the system is using him. And then only Charlie remains, partly because of luck. But luck exists in every system. The other's downfall represents something else. It shows that the path to success no longer runs through the free market. It runs through a system owned by a corporation. Returning to technology, one of the film's most intriguing symbols finally begins to make sense: the Oompa Loompas. They know in advance how every character's story will end, as if they already know what is about to happen. In a system like this, that would not be impossible. The patchwork is built on technology. It constantly monitors and analyzes its citizens. Given enough data, it eventually knows more than what you have done. It can begin to predict what you are going to do. Gradually, surprises disappear. There is an interesting parallel here. One of Peter Thiel's best-known companies is Palantir. Its name comes from Tolkien's Seeing Stones, objects that could reveal distant events and uncover hidden connections. Palantir attempts to do the same thing digitally. It connects separate pieces of data, searches for patterns, reveals relationships that remain invisible to everyone else, and by doing so, it becomes increasingly capable of predicting future events. In that sense, the Oompa Loompas are not merely workers. They are the embodiment of the system itself. There is another turning point in Willy Wonka's story, his first grey hair. For the first time, he realizes that one day he is going to die. Everything that follows begins with that single realization. The factory tour, the search for an heir, the entire selection process. All of it revolves around the same question. What will happen to his empire after he is gone? At the center of Peter Thiel's worldview lies the very same question.
I think the thing that's really incompatible with life is death. So let's just start with that as a baseline. I would hope that we could agree that if we set our sights on, we say that everyone's doomed to an old age of frailty and disease and death, that we're perhaps setting our sights quite low.
He does not see death as a natural part of life. He sees it as humanity's greatest enemy. He has repeatedly described death as evil and unnatural. Not something to accept, but something to defeat. That is one of the reasons he has become one of the most prominent advocates of transhumanism. He believes technological progress should push beyond the biological limits of the human body, ultimately toward immortality. According to Thiel, Christianity and technology are not opposites. He interprets the words of the Lord's Prayer, "May your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven," as an invitation to begin building the kingdom of God here on earth with the help of technology. That includes curing disease, slowing aging, and perhaps one day defeating death itself. In Thiel's view, the greatest inequality in the world is not between the rich and the poor, it is between the living and the dead. If we begin from that premise, then his political philosophy, his investments, and his technological vision all point in the same direction, toward a world that gives technological progress the greatest possible freedom. A world in which humanity may one day overcome the one thing that no one has ever escaped: death. Have you ever noticed how strange it is that some of the richest people in the world speak of another elite that supposedly oppresses them? That J.D. Vance once worked at Peter Thiel's venture capital firm, and that in 2022, Thiel gave him what was then the largest individual donation ever made to a US Senate campaign, or why the technology elite has become one of the Republican Party's most important allies. Interesting questions. If Thiel believes that freedom and democracy are fundamentally incompatible and that democratic institutions stand in the way of technological progress, then dismantling those institutions becomes a logical consequence of that worldview. Whether the patchwork will ever become reality is another question, but the philosophy behind it has already escaped the page of books. It has entered the highest levels of politics. The vision of a world in which democratic oversight is replaced by corporate rule. A world where power does not disappear, it becomes private property.